Yo,
So you probably know at this point, I for one love horror. And one of the things that's so important for me in a horror setting is that of the setting itself. Most often, horror like Friday the 13th or the Halloween series takes a setting we're all familiar with, and that's used as the basis for whatever the scare is. And then several of my favorite horrors, like the 1982 movie The Thing, take a setting that we can sort of relate to, like people at a research base, and then use that for whatever cosmic horror comes out of it. But I think it's especially interesting whenever a horror series creates an entirely unique world that is so visceral and outside of our realm of understanding that just the thought of it in itself is enough to creep us out. And today I want to bring one of those horrors to you. Mystery Flesh Pit National Park. Now, this was originally started by an artist known as Trevor Roberts, who goes by Strange Vehicles on Reddit. And specifically, it began within the subreddit r/world building. It began as a sort of creative exercise of seeing how intricate or heavily put together of a world you could make. However, as you can see, Trevor went way beyond the average or what was required of him, and instead created this super expansive universe. That being of a now defunct national park that was made out of a living cave that is potentially a giant hundreds long creature underneath the earth itself. Not only that, but Trevor was able to tell this story through a series of brochures and park guides that look like they would be standard of any national park. So there's not only creativity with the world itself, but also the manner in which information is given to us. So today I want to go through some of the details and break down this entire ARG that Trevor has crafted.
but I want to be a machine gunner.
There's no way that I'm going to be able to get to every single minute detail, as cool as they all are. So I'm going to leave a link to the original website where all of this information is cataloged for you to find, as well as the artist's Patreon and subreddit, because I'm telling you, this is some wild stuff and you really need to check
There you
it
go.
out. And you know what else you should check out? Today's sponsor that allows you to save
Oh,
money
I was
while
hoping one of them would be the leader.
because if you're like me, nowadays online shopping is pretty much all that you do. Like if there's a specific item that I want, I just find it online. There's nothing more satisfying than whenever you're at a checkout to have your friend pat you on the shoulder down the horror of the flesh pit. But first of all, and as always, thank you for watching.
Thank you
So
for
the story of
watching.
Mystery
It
Flesh
really
Pit
means
National
the
Park
most.
is told very non-chronologically. Basically, Trevor will release these incremental posters and pictures that allow us to paint a picture of the world together. So lucky for you all, I already did all that and believe I can track down what the first references to the park, or at least, you know, on a timeline, what the first references to the park can be. We'll break down more of the actual details of what the pit is like, as well as the quite literal anatomy of it later. But right now, we're just getting an introduction to how this thing came to be. In our first letter from James Jackson, also known as Jim Jackson, which we'll see more of later, he writes in a letter to Mr. Colton Fleming explaining the finding of this cave itself. The letter reads, "Dear Colton, now you know more than most how I may be prone to hyperbole on occasion, but those Whitmer boys that called on Monday are on to something amazing. I mean really truly amazing. This isn't any mineral deposit, Colton. At least not like anything I've seen. I went ahead and sent some samples for you and Chris to start looking at. I didn't think you all would believe me if I didn't. This thing that those old boys found is some kind of organic deposit that must go down at least 500 or 600 feet by my reckoning. Not a fungus either. This thing breathes and makes sounds same as any other creature, and it bleeds. God, how it bleeds. Colton, it's a mess out here. John and some of the others think it might be something from outer space. Most of the hombres we brought out to start the excavation call it Diablo de Bajo, and are real weary of going too close to what we figure must be the mouth of this thing. Right now, I don't think I care what it is or where it came from. I'm an oil man, and I think we're on to something real big out here. Once you and Chris start looking at these samples, go ahead and give Lenny a call to send out his crew, and make sure they bring at least 4 excavators. Pay them whatever they ask to make it fast. Also, there's a card in here for a fella in Carlsbad with some pretty heavy-duty spelunking gear. Pay him whatever he wants to get here by Friday or Saturday. I'll call Beverly to have her put out other jobs on hold for the next 3 weeks, but you should remind her anyway. We need to move real fast on this. Dale Whitmer already left this morning to find someone in Gumption to come take some photos. It'll be a circus once that happens. God help us if the feds come out and lock it down. There's something about this thing that's important, and I don't want to see something this special get in the hands of some game warden. Regards, James Jackson of Jackson Surveying Incorporated. So as you can see there, it seems that just a normal mining operation or oil drilling operation came across this giant creature hidden underground. Now Jackson was right as to say that this thing underground, whatever they walked into, was actually the mouth of it. Because as we're going to see in a little bit, this thing has entire nervous systems, muscles, and stomach components.
Little desktop.
And it seems that this agape opening is in fact the mouth of this creature. Now, before we get into a lot of the details, or my favorite part, the tourism surrounding the flesh pit, I need to go ahead and read the second letter from Jackson as to make sense of this. Dear Colton, things are really starting to take off down here. At around 3 or so last night, we broke a new depth record of 1,800 feet vertical descent from the maw. It's a damn shame you and the other folks are so spooked by this pit. To be down there in it really is something else. Now don't misunderstand, I'm not saying it's easy. God Almighty, is it tough getting around down in its gullet and such. A man's gotta have an iron constitution or a mighty thick skull, and lucky me, the good Lord has seen fit to bless me with both. Some of the boys here have rigged up scuba gear, and we've been able to squeeze around down there with some effort. Giant muscles, giant bones, innards so big you could drive a trailer truck through. Strange critters scuttling around in the dark down there too. Big bugs and germs and worms and other queer things that you wouldn't believe. Some kind of crab thing the size of coyote crept out a week and a half ago, and we caught it crawling around the feed trailer. I got a good look at it before one of Dale's boys shot at it, and it skittered away. We had the funeral for the third roustabout to pass away this month on Tuesday. The papers are already talking gossip more than I like, and I'm hopeful that Bill and the other attorneys can keep the vultures and the feds at bay. People don't understand until they've seen it and been down inside it, Colton. We're pioneers and explorers here. This is good work. This is God's work. Nobody knows what this mystery pit is, or what it eats, or how long it's been here. We need some guys with real smarts, not oil men. Doctors, scientists, and good decent folk who would have nothing to do with us. I'm mighty glad that you've taken responsibility for holding down the fort back home while I'm out here playing the cowboy. You're a good man, Colton, the kind of quality individual they don't make anymore. Maybe I'm hoping I can find some of that goodness myself someday. Maybe down in the belly of this beast. Give Samantha and the baby my regards. Jim Jackson. P.S. There's a company out of Fort Worth that I've called up to help with the exploration. I attached their card to this letter. Give their geologist a call and let them know the details. I'm told they're very good at what they do. And attached we see a business card for the Anodyne Deep Earth Mining Company. Now Anodyne's going to come up a lot because they're pretty much responsible for everything that happens after this point. So the pit
Bro's name is in the way. I can't fucking see.
And as Jackson talked about in the letters, very quickly the local populace as well as the authorities began to grow interest in it because
duh.
And one of the most interesting things about this story is the immediate
oh my god, move right in my way. As soon as I fucking need to shoot these fucking people, man.
Of what certain groups do, but through what you kind of pick up on as some government influence on they wish to get the park sanctified as a national park. What that means is that the park itself is treated in the same way the Smokies or Yellowstone would be treated, as in it cannot be destroyed by any newcomers coming in. However, it can be hosted by different companies like restaurants or lounges, and more importantly, anodyne maintains access to the resources. So the main questions going in at this point is how big
Oh yeah,
is
walking
the
my way
pit,
right
and
when I
what
need to shoot.
exactly
Fucking
did they
love you,
use?
dude.
And measurements of tissue as far down as they could see initially are about 30 kilometers, which again probably isn't even close to how deep it actually is. And charts like this one that have the original surveyor's mark show that they mapped it out down to about 4,000 feet. So in other words, it's pretty big. And if you'll pay attention to that part in the second letter, people are not the only creatures alive inside of the living cave itself. As a matter of fact, as you can see on the major parasitic fauna chart, there are several massive creatures that people have to worry about. Like for example, the abyssal sopapod. That's probably not how it's pronounced, but whatever.
Oh my god, these fucking people just know how to get in my way, right? When I need to shoot.
initially saw
Holy
this,
fuck.
I was like, oh well, what is that? Like a really big beetle like that? And then I was reading in another entry about how they eat people and can grow up to 20 feet long. So in other words, a small school bus that eats people.
Oh my gosh.
Which would mean all these other creatures you can see there are probably much bigger than people are. Also beneath several of these posts is a sort of explanation that goes into more detail around whatever's being discussed. So underneath the bug chart, we can see in the description that it reads, this chart and many others like it were produced by Park Service as an educational tool for use in classrooms, museums, and universities. Popular among natural history enthusiasts, the illustrations featured on these posters were the result of an intensive expeditions and surveys into the mystery flesh pit. While visitors are almost certain to encounter common fauna, such as the myriad of macrobacteria subspecies, many organisms such as the Venice shamble and the abyssal sopapod, probably pronouncing that wrong again, tend to evade trails and high traffic areas, making them difficult to spot. As a practical tool, these illustrations were useful in training wildlife management rangers in proper firearm techniques for safely dispatching a dangerous organism. For this reason, the designers of this and other charts attempted to represent the scale of the organisms in relation to each other as accurately as possible. So if you're going into the pit, you better be strapped. And also, like, look at all the detail in these different designs. Like for example, the lesser sopapod, which looks like a giant tendril shrimp thing, and then the gastric bristleworm, which is huge and terrifying. And there's some more specific entries about some of the lesser known or lesser seen ones. Like for example here with the evolution of the amorphous shame pamphlet, which is presented as a sort of brochure for people taking a hike through the trail, you can see the life cycle of something that is believed to be an ancient descendant from a weasel that over time crawled into the cave and slowly lost so many traits of itself, it eventually just became a blob of organs that crawls inside of crevices in the flesh walls of the cave itself and just like absorbs the nutrients, which is And as you'll remember me mentioning earlier, the flesh pit itself became a national park, hiking and all, which means, as pictured on maps like this that show the orifice or mouth of the pit, as well as an interior trail map, people would go on these very long excursions walking through the innards of this creature. And people could visit such amazing sites such as the northern bronchial forest, which is the sort of lungs of this creature, the amniotic thermal springs, which is something we are going to talk about in a minute, the gastric sea, which is digestive enzymes, or the fondue village, which is bone marrow so large you can walk inside of it, which is a very comforting thought. And some of the dangers that hikers through the park, and I'm going to continue using park, but you know, by park I mean giant flesh underground monster thing, we can see in the wildlife safety pamphlet some of the things people hiking would have to worry about. Like with the introduction, it says your visit to the mystery flesh pit can be a most pleasurable and rewarding experience, or it can be a time of vexation, distress, or even tragedy. Much depends on how you and your family observe these simple guidelines and avoid designated hazards. Take a minute to read these simple but important safety rules,
Ooh.
then go on to a pleasant park experience. I also want to mention all of these pamphlets, as well as everything that I'm going to mention that's been industrialized within the park, has been done by the Anodyne Corporation. Visitors and wildlife within the Mystery
Can I
Flesh
actually?
Pit often frequent the same areas within the park. It is likely that park wildlife and visitors will encounter one another, but by remaining calm and following the basic advice of experienced veteriobiologists, you increase the odds of a positive outcome for both yourself and the wildlife. All visitors who partake on self-guided excursions beyond reinforced and enclosed trails within the Mystery Flesh Pit are required to attend an orientation at the lower visitor center. During this orientation, a park ranger will inform you about areas that are close to visitors due to high fauna activity or recent wildlife-human encounters. It is important to be aware when camping and hiking within the Mystery Flesh Pit to avoid wildlife foraging areas, chimal deposits, gastric bladders, surface wildlife carcass mounds, etc. So not only do you have to worry about these giant bug things that are essentially this creature's immune system, but you have to worry about the creature itself digesting you. We'll talk about that in a minute, but a final thought on encountering these things. It says at the end of the pamphlet, if you see flora or fauna within the park and it does not appear to notice you, back out of sight and change your course. Move out of the area or quietly observe at a safe distance without approaching or otherwise disturbing it. Disturbance is evident whenever wildlife change their behavior because of you. If it stops eating and looks up, raises its antennas, or secretes scent enzymes, or begins making territorial clicks while trying to locate you, you are too close. While many life forms within the pit seem to be tolerant of human presence at a distance further than 200 yards, each creature is different. Use telephoto lenses and endoscopes where possible. Allow migrating bacterial colonies to pass by your camp undisturbed. If you have made sure that the wildlife is aware of your presence, so it is not surprised, and have kept all your gear under your direct control, allow any organism you encounter to travel unhindered. You may just be afforded the opportunity to safely observe these amazing creatures in their natural environment. Yeah, these giant 20-foot tall shrimp things that eat people, just don't panic and just let them walk by your camp. Which I guess, like, their resistance to gunshots is mentioned earlier, but I guess that's all you can do. Also, not only mentioned here, but in other places, it seems all the creatures within the pit itself is blind, which makes sense because before we opened up the hole into the mouth of this thing, it was entirely underground, and everywhere throughout the pit is just pitch black. So none of these creatures use eyesight, it's all sound and pheromone tracing. So remember how just a second ago I said that the pit or park itself can eat you? They know that can happen because it's happened. On one of the deeper trails through the park itself, you can come across something known as the circus clown chimus. The description of it reads as though it may look like a colorful ice cream birthday cake covered in a glazed frosting, this calcified formation is anything but festive. In 1976, a group of performers accidentally fell into the upper maw of the entry orifice. While the soft flesh of the pit throat somewhat cushioned the performer's fall, the unexpected dilation of an epiglottal fold allowed them to slide down into a then unreinforced area of the pit. Rescue personnel were able to locate the performers inside a digestive sac a few hours later. By that time, all 50 stunts people had already begun being digested by the pit. Rescue personnel cut them out, correctly guessing that many were still alive. An experimental antacid spray was discharged on top of the gooey, shrieking mound, but it was too late. Instead of reducing the acidic effects of the partially digested bodies of the performers, the experimental compound flash calcified into the multicolored formation that you see in front of you. Though hauntingly beautiful, the circus clown chimus is a somber reminder of why it is always important to observe all safety instructions and to always stay on the marked trails while visiting the interior of the Mystery Flesh Pit. So, a group of clowns were performing above the flesh pit itself because
come on, let me on.
People are going to be stupid.
Man.
And then 50 of them fell into the pit, couldn't be located for hours, and when they did locate them, they were trapped inside of a digestive like enzyme sac, like a giant lysosome. And then when they cut them out, they were all melted together and screaming and shrieking, and then froze like that. And they just left it there. And then they had the audacity to call it hauntingly beautiful, which no, it's not, it's just haunting. But despite all of this, people still visit the park. And while reading this, at the first moment, I'm like, that's dumb, they wouldn't. And then I thought for 3 seconds, and I'm like, yeah, they probably would. So once Anodyne had the initial park opened up, or at least the central part of it, that's when the advertising began. Such as this poster for the park itself, which says, discover verdant forest, majestic scenery, and cosmic terror. Enjoy legendary trout fishing, geotonic carnal moans, broken philosophy, backcountry hiking, and camping. I love the broken philosophy because, yeah, where's your God now? A lot of the supplemental material you can read on your own is about how it was hard for businesses to at first sell the idea of the flesh pit because, you know, people were reasonably afraid. So one of the things they did was they came up with this mascot called Caver Coop, who would do these animated sort of Looney Tune style films talking about going through the cave and why it's really not something to be afraid of, in a sort of propaganda technique. And they would have several events, and some catered towards children, like Caver Coop's Spooky Halloween Carnival, where among the activities for children to perform is haunted hay rides, campfire stories, safe trick-or-treating, and blood. Because if there's one thing this giant cave has a lot of,
It's blood.
it's interesting with these, a lot of the brutality that occurs behind the
One
scenes,
down, brother.
just for all of the happy sort of national park vibes that are put on the display. Like, for example, in one letter called Experiences of a Flesh Pit Mine Worker, a mine worker writes to a child telling them what it's like to work for Anodyne in the flesh pit, where essentially a full crew of people work outside of this giant mining rig that works as a boring machine cutting through the cave. And by cutting through, I don't mean in the way that like other things dig through rock. I mean quite literally, it's hacking and slashing and there's blood everywhere and it's insane. In describing to the boy how the rig works, he says ideally the rig cuts as it goes, leaving a burnt cauterized path through the meat while also crushing and processing any minerals it runs through. In the real world, the pit isn't uniform, and you end up running into all kinds of obstacles requiring interventional solutions, or the brass up top decide that they don't want you just cutting through certain parts of the anatomy. So you suit up and get out ahead of the rig to poke and prod and pry at a walking pace. 8 hours a day for weeks at a time. Rigs have a big hydraulic arms that reach forward and push, lift, and splay open organs or muscle bundles before us roustabouts would go in and suck up or hose out any blood, cut tendons, cauterized tissue, rinse, and repeat. So while you're thinking that whatever's going on may harm this creature, this thing is so big, it's the equivalent of having like a zit, basically, everything that these people are doing. And as you can see from diagrams like this with the park trail engineer, some of the places inside of the pit are so tight or so inhospitable because you're in a giant immune system, basically, that you have to wear these full body suits and put these stents up everywhere that you go so that the muscles don't collapse in and crush you to death. And vehicles like the Park Ranger utility vehicle shows you what you need in order to traverse through this myriad of guts. I also like a lot of these smaller touches that he puts into the world building, like for example this necklace that was taken off of a mine worker that says, "A flesh pick worker's prayer. Each day I descend into the deep, cutting meat to earn my keep. Pray to my Father in heaven above that I return to those I love. If somehow death and I should meet, as even the flesh pit needs to eat, I want my loved ones to be sure that in Jesus' arms I am secure." And it's an interesting way to combine these West Texas vibes, of which the pit itself takes place in, with this horrific cosmic Lovecraftian horror that the authors built. And it is dangerous. You can see in several of the different designs that are posted on here, trail engineers, surveyors, and commercial mine technicians, all these need these massive spacesuits. And there's even special weapons shown, like the Anatomical Environment Multi-Tool, or AEM, which was made to shoot spikes into walls in order to hoist the walls of the cave so you can walk through it, but they later realized was really, really good at taking out these giant lobster things that attack the workers. So you may be asking, all these workers, all these miners, like, understandably it's a park, but what are they looking for? And the answer is all sorts of stuff. Like using chemicals and enzymes found within the cave, Anodyne became this multi-conglomerate corporation that made things from laundry cleaner over to powerful computers that use the nerve fibers of the cave walls as a means of processing information, and things like Coke Heartthrob, which is a special flavor of Coke that has some very special abilities. As the description reads on that, it says Coke Heartthrob was first introduced on Valentine's Day in 1985 as a limited promotion, but sold so well over the summer that Coca-Cola added it to their primary beverage roster in 1986. The defining ingredient in Coke Heartthrob was, of course, amniotic ballast, harvested from special glands deep within the mystery flesh pit. The potent aphrodisiacal properties of amniotic ballast were diminished by heavily diluting the chemical before adding it to the beverage, but Coke Heartthrob still developed a notorious reputation for its unusual intoxicating effects. So remember earlier how I said there's the amniotic pools that we're going to mention later? This is the part where I mentioned them. So hidden deep within the cave, they found something that they believe is a part of the creature's endocrine system, known as the amniotic thermal springs. And it turns out these things have insane healing properties. We see images of how this is used as a treatment for Alzheimer's or better aging in the elderly, as well as being used for cancer treatment and all sorts of different illnesses. There are several spas in and around the pit that use this amniotic ballast as a source of physical healing. On the Mystery Below Journey pamphlet, among all the different lounging and dining options we see, like the Marriott Hotel that they have, or the Hard Rock Cafe located just outside of the pit, and even things like an IMAX theater, we can see
like under the map
advertisement for the amniotic thermal springs. It says on there, located on the ground floor of the visitor center, by the vending machines are the amniotic baths. So this is above surface before you go into the pit. Amniotic secretions are pumped from glands deep within the pit for visitors who are unable to descend into the pit. These springs are known to have a range of positive effects on human psychology, physiology, and well-being, and are enjoyed both medicinally and recreationally. Note, as the visitor center is a family-friendly facility, the surface spring baths are diluted to a 1:20 potency ratio with filtered water. For higher concentrations within adult-only baths, park guests are encouraged to visit the pleasure domes located east of the lower visitor center complex within the Mystery Flesh Pit. Okay, so these amniotic things are used as aphrodisiacs in Coke, and it says here that they are heavily diluted in the park itself because it's a family-friendly atmosphere. Or I should say within the hotel itself. In the park, they're not diluted at all. For those that don't know, an aphrodisiac is something that gets you in the mood. And if you were curious how effective of an aphrodisiac this stuff is, in the chart that shows us details of the amniotic thermal springs itself, we can see a spring potency chart. Now, essentially, remember this is a giant creature. The thermal springs are these glands that you can walk through the canals of and bathe inside of these giant hot tubs, essentially made out of enzymes, and all the different nodes of this gland act as different bathhouses. On the chart for the spring potency, you can see that there is a green line, and for the green line it says visitors are encouraged to consult a physician before entering baths below the green line, because it can have different effects on your well-being. green. And then the yellow line on the super potent baths, the most potent of which being the libido bath, it says visitors are encouraged to consult a religious, mystic, or sexual wellness counselor before entering baths below the yellow line. Because the more potent this stuff is, the more in the mood you get. It says that outside of the main bath, which remember is very, very diluted, users have to be 18 years old to go into the main baths. Also because you can't bring any clothing in there, you have to be naked, because of course you do. It even says on this chart, a secondary and infamous property of amniotic spring fluid are the psychoactive and aphrodisiacal effects it has on those who consume or topically apply it. Bathers describe a gentle euphoric sensation when soaking in higher potency springs, with the effects of concentrated exposure being well documented by several best-selling short films, many of which are available for purchase by request in the Upper Visitor Center gift shop. Beyond the physical sensations, visitors often claim that they develop deep emotional bonds with those they interact with while inside the thermal springs. So you go inside the nodes of this giant monster thing underground and fall in love, which is a story as old as time. Also, looking at this chart, I just noticed a bottle of water is $13 down here. Oh my gosh, that is price gouging. That's the real horror of this whole thing. These horrible amusement park level
that
gouging,
timing.
my word. Anyway, also looking at this node chart, there is a small sort of squishy node that comes off to the side, and it says undeveloped ballast bulb. Visitors are encouraged to experience the traditional bathing process by crawling into the bulb orifice. No thank you. And then over to the side we can see pumps that work as a way of pumping this amniotic fluid to the surface. What's interesting is reading the final paragraph of this entire chart. It says amniotic spring fluid is safe to eat and drink and has enjoyed limited exposure as an additive to a variety of popular consumer foodstuffs, such as the seasonally available Coca-Cola Heartthrob, Feel Good McFlurry, and even a ballast-based cordial liquor. And if you'll remember what I talked about at the beginning, this is a since shut down national park, and it was shut down over a specific event that happened that we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, several may be curious as to what the actual layout of the park is. As far as the hiking routes go, it says several of the different routes you can go on. For example, the Bowels of the Earth route, it says the basic tour through the Mystery Flesh Pit. It is a 7.85 mile self-guiding stroll through many large and famous features like the Thor's Ribcage, Septum Falls, God's Mistake, and Oyster's Shame. Then there's some more adventurous ones you can go on. There's some guided ones by a ranger that you have to go through, where you pretty much have to crawl through these really tight blood vessel things, which also in the description for one of those tours, known as the Swallowed Whole Tour, it says, note, this tour is not recommended to those who suffer from claustrophobia or a fear of being eaten alive, also known as those with common sense. What's also interesting that you can find while looking through this is several of the park signs that are shown. Like, for example, this one that says, notice respiratory mucosal folds are unmarked, exercise caution to avoid entrapment, because you can walk into the cilia of one of these things and get absorbed. Now, if you were to be absorbed, what might happen to you? And I assure you now, the answer is not good. See, on the Identifying Wildlife pamphlet earlier, there was one specific creature called compound surface fauna. And the description says, on rare occasions, abyssal whatever that word is, and other park wildlife will venture outside of the pit and will pull surface animals such as deer, livestock, coyotes, and rabbits into the Mystery Flesh Pit. If not eaten by park fauna, these animals may undergo a fascinating phenomenon known as anatomical amalgamation. This process, which is not fully understood by park scientists, results in the creation of a compound organism, which is a hybrid of constituent surface animals. No two of these amalgamations are the same, though the resulting physiology often results in similar conditions such as partial fusing of major body elements and relocation of internal organs to locations on the exterior of the body. Because of the gruesome and seemingly haphazard nature of the combinations, many compound surface fauna do not live beyond a few hours or days from the time they are discovered. Should you encounter a shambling compound surface fauna, please do not feed it or otherwise engage in activity which could prolong its suffering. And then the most terrifying note in red at the bottom: in the extremely unlikely event that you encounter an amalgamation containing one or more human constituent organisms, contact a park ranger immediately via one of the emergency telephones installed along trail routes. And in horrific images like this and descriptions around it, we can see what happened to those people. It says, while HIPAA and similar regulations prevent me from finding out exactly how many people even suffered amalgamation, it's estimated that fewer than half a dozen ever survived the treatment process to recovery. Recovery, though, is a loaded word here. The treatment co-developed by Baylor Medical Center and Anodyne Corporation was highly dependent on the nature of the amalgamation and seems to have been most successful with combined masses containing only human tissue. The procedure for treatment involved removing the brain and as much of the spinal cord as possible from the amalgamation. When possible, extraction of other organs such as eyes, cochlear tissue, tongues, and larynx would later enable the recovered patient a sensory experience much closer to that which they had previously enjoyed, since medical technology is even still unable to replicate the organic sensory quality of human sensory tissues. However, the difficulty and cost of this additional procedure all but ensured that this rarely took place. Once extracted, the brain of the individual patient would be placed in a nutrient cell, and connected to a proprietary interface and life support system developed by Anodyne Company. A rudimentary, computer-based system could be used to communicate with the recovered patient after several months of therapy, and in some cases, individuals were reported able to use vocoders to synthesize speech. It is unknown how many, if any, of these individuals are still living today. So most likely, through the cilia in the wall that it said do not get stuck into, you get mushed together with a bunch of other stuff that also got stuck in the walls and become these blob creatures that they try to harvest some organs from to keep you kind of alive. I hate it here. But those visitors that still decide to go in through this massive elevator into a central thing called the Lower Visitor Center, located in the essentially throat of this creature. And as you can see from this image, it is a huge multi-level shopping mall with vendors and gift shops and restaurants and everything else you could imagine. In the description for it, it says, your adventure into the wonder and magnificence of the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park begins as your enclosed gondola begins to descend down into the darkness, away from the blistering heat and light of the Permian Basin. Just when the 20-minute twisting and turning ride down into the maw of this immense organism feels like it might never end, an illuminated structure comes into view beneath your feet. Step out of the elevator car and into the well-lit and comfortable lobby of the Lower Visitor Center, your gateway to an unforgettable visit to one of the world's most unique natural wonders. So this thing is so far down there, it takes 20 minutes on an elevator to get to a 8-story shopping mall. And if you look back at the maps of this entire thing, that is still nothing compared to the full size of this creature. What is interesting is that in several of the supplemental materials, you can find audio like this that shows what noises played whenever you make it to the visitor center.
Hello, welcome to the Lower Visitor Center. Here, you can start your incredible otherworldly adventures with our child-friendly tours. For the daring thrill seeker, sign up for private expedition orientation classes at the front desk. For other questions, feel free to ask any of our park rangers. Remember, adventure awaits in the underground.
Also inside of these restaurants in the Lower Visitor Center, for a long time it was said that they served meat from the cave wall itself, which is gross. However, in one of the Q&As that the creator did, he said that this is not true. However, people have ate the meat and says it tastes too gamey to serve. But that the giant lobster things taste delicious. And I've also talked at length already about the amniotic springs, also known as the pleasure domes. But another superstructure that you come across, which is actually at the furthest traced or at least mapped out point in the pits, is the Intra-Park Wellness Resort.
What?
This is essentially a giant resort or ski lodge type thing that is built onto the walls of what is basically the stomach of this creature.
Bro didn't even let us
something
on.
called the Greater Gastric Sea, which, remember, everything in the pit's like dark, so you can't see forever. But as far as the people can see, it is a endless sea of bile and stomach juices. And this resort has pretty much everything from beauty shops, convenience shops, a comedy depot, an arcade system, a techno biz, which, wait, what? A dance club. It has a dance club because of course it does. This entire thing is a monument to man's arrogance. There's a petting zoo as well where you can pet the declawed lobster creatures. Anyway, and in all the details about the spa treatments and the thermal things you can go to, it talks about the controls that you can have for your room yourself, like a humidity control, and also a window cleaning knob, because since you are overlooking a sea of gastric juices in your hotel room, they keep popping up on the window, so you have these giant wipers to clean it off, which, again, disgusting. I should also mention, speaking of humidity, you're inside of a living thing, so anywhere that is not on the main trail where they have constant AC systems running is 98.6 degrees and 100% humidity, so miserable, which is something a lot of the miners talked about having to deal with, the constant heat and pressure being inside of this thing, because you're essentially a foreign pathogen inside of a giant body. So it's absolutely unbearable if you're not in one of the park designated areas. And even then you could still get killed by the lobster creatures, so just don't do it. One of the last details of the actual park layout that I want to mention, besides the fact that, if you're not thinking about already, everywhere through the park has to be held open with stents so that the muscles or systems don't close back around you, is the emergency telephones that are placed throughout several different points in the park. Like on this poster, you can see that there are these phones placed around them by AT&T, and in the description, it describes that 150 miles of cable were laid as a means of getting communications outside of this organism. Also, seasoned hikers and park field staff referred to these as lighthouses, as walking through the dark with your flashlight, you would see these random blue phones while walking along your path. Which, with all of these, I want you to imagine like the flesh and the noises and just the fact you're walking through something's giant body system, and to just be walking through such an alien place and come across a blue telephone box is so cosmically terrifying.
I love it so much.
Another thing to mention is public reaction to the pit itself. And as we can see through several images, the town of Gumption, Texas, that the pit was located in, absolutely loved the tourism and capitalized on it. However, some were not so happy about it. For example, an advertisement that was hung on hotel doors within the pit is an ad for someone called Homer Litfer Butcher, who works as an attorney for people who were injured while in the flesh pit. And as we can see on the April 1981 issue of Sanctify, the magazine of the Southern Baptist Association, it says on the cover, Baptist Convention denounces exploration of mystery flesh pit, calls it a foul tunnel to Lucifer himself, buried by the Almighty, enjoyed by the damned. And then in a very interesting picture, we can see a image of Dante's Inferno comparing the pit itself to the mouth of hell, which is really cool, and I think I agree with the church on this one. There's also 3 Q&As, or at least 3 so far, that Trevor has done to explain people's questions about the entire world of Flesh Pit National Park. And one of the questions that he was asked is, how long could someone live in the flesh pit long term? To which he said, archaeological evidence of prehistoric human activity within the pit has led to conjecture among scientists that long-term habitation within the anatomy of the pit is possible and unlikely. Without modern technology and tools, any human long-term in the entrails of the superorganism would need to adapt to the perpetual darkness,
no, don't give me away, Gunnery.
Constant high humidity heat, and continually changing fleshscape in order to survive. Fleshscape is a fantastic word. Oh my gosh. Over hundreds of
Talk about
generations,
suppression.
when
Holy
combined with
fuck.
poorly understood long-term effects of consuming amniotic ballast fluid,
I feel
it is entirely
suppressed.
possible that humans adapt to this lifestyle fundamentally different from modern humans. Or in other words, if people lived long-term down there, they would probably adapt into these amorphous creatures like other things that are down there. I choose to say some of that stuff down there is people, but whatever. A couple things that I can't find exactly where it was mentioned because I've read through so many of these pamphlets and I can't remember where everything was. But while first exploring the pit, they came across armor from around the period of the Spanish Inquisition, which implies that people got there way earlier, or at the very least they were dragged underground by the things that were there. And one of the more interesting things said in one of these Q&As is someone asked the question, are there any Jumanos?
The tank is still over there. Oh my god.
Native to the surrounding area, folk tales or oral histories concerning the superorganism. To which Trevor answers, there is a fascinating legend from the near Caddo people by the name of Sacred Medicine Water, which I will reproduce here. The favor of the Great Spirit rested on the abundant forest, flowers, songbirds, and small animals of these quiet hills. Then a fierce dragon devastated the land, bringing disease and hunger and hatred and greed on the people. The Indian nations pleaded with the Great Spirit to subdue the dragon into a deep slumber, and the night of all the heavenly forces contrived to bury it under the world, where it shakes the earth even today. Once the Great Spirit had vanquished the dragon, he caused pure water to gush up through the earth from the beast and asked that his favorite place be held neutral ground, so all can share in the healing waters. So here we see this dragon mentioned in Native American folklore is the thing that got knocked out and buried underground. Because if you remember, this thing was completely underground until the oil man Jim Jackson found it in 1973. And these healing waters that people would drink that came up from the ground after the dragon
Get out the way!
are quite possibly the amniotic fluids that we have found in the current day have healing properties. So, if this creature was knocked into a deep slumber, then we better hope it never wakes up. Which it definitely did, and that would be the situation that led to the shutdown of the park in the 2007 catastrophe. Now, the incident is hinted at several times in different stories, or images I should say, we come across, because everything that's shown, all the brochures, are relics of the now shut down park being put together by this creator online. That is, until we get to the official U.S. Commission on Geobiological Resource and Public Safety, who did a final incident report on what happened.
I don't understand this.
In the executive summary, they say, at 9:41 p.m. Central Standard Time on July the 4th of 2007, the Permian Basin Superorganism Natural Preserve, known colloquially as Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, experienced a catastrophic disaster which resulted in over 750 fatalities and over 1,800 major injuries. In the weeks following the incident, approximately 18,000 individuals from the surrounding communities sought medical and psychological treatment for ailments including breathing problems, chest pain, shortness of breath, nausea, birth defects, hallucinations, depression, anxiety, internal bleeding, sore throat, and headaches as a direct result of contact with gastric ejecta which had been introduced to the atmosphere. Investigators have concluded that this disaster was chiefly characterized by a premature geobiological consumption event caused by the catastrophic failure.
Oh, I was hoping he didn't see me. He definitely sees me.
Constrain and limit the gastric, motor, and neurological actions of the Permian Basin superorganism. Investigators have included that the failure of these critical safety measures are the direct result of negligent practices by the primary site operating contractor, Anodyne Deep Earth Mining, a subsidiary of Anodyne Incorporated. So essentially, they are saying that 750 people died and a whole lot more were injured because of negligence on Anodyne's part, and then it goes by a step-by-step collection of what exactly happened on the night of July the 4th, 2007. We are going to go through that report now. So, start of relevant timeline. At 10:29 a.m. on July the 4th, Unreasonably high rains forced park administrators to cancel a July 4th concert and fireworks display scheduled to take place on the surface park grounds. Many visitors who had already purchased tickets to the event become upset, and a decision is made to extend the park hours until midnight for those who had purchased event tickets, and that was their first mistake. 8 p.m. normal closing time for the national park. A typical shift change of reduced night staff in the control room takes place. 9:16 p.m. Harvesting crews working in the western extremities of the organism set a new extraction record to meet a quota for bonuses in time for the holiday weekend. 9:30 p.m. Control room operators
Yo, look at this
complete
dude.
a routine system self-test and discover a relay fault error resulting from increased electrical demand from mining equipment and tourist infrastructure. A control room operator logs the fault and notifies an on-duty engineer. Basically, because they were running over shift, and because on another end of the park they were trying to mine really fast, the electronics became overwhelmed. 9:41 p.m. Water drainage from surface rain into the entry orifice begins to collect in the sand gullet. Drainage pumps are automatically activated by a sensor system, but fail to initialize due to the relay fault. An emergency backup pump running on a separate emergency circuit is automatically activated. 9:42 p.m. A critical alarm in the control room alerts operators that the emergency water pump has seized and is inoperative. Under lubrication of the pump's impeller bushings resulted in corrosion due to the moist interior of the flesh pit environment. Because yeah, if you've got all this equipment inside something as humid as a living, breathing organism, stuff's gonna rust. 9:48 p.m. Technicians arrive at the primary pump station to discover the sand gullet almost completely submerged. Water begins to pour over the dorsal respiratory ridge and into bronchial bulbules. Control room operators divert power to hydraulic stent rams to brace for expected choke response. So essentially, normally, water goes down into a first little dip inside of the throat.
Can't fucking mount my gun anywhere, dude. This game pisses me off.
Because they're rusted, the water keeps pouring, and it's now pouring.
That looked like a
into the
perfect
lungs
fence
of
to
this
mount my
thing.
gun. Nope.
Which again, this has never been a problem
Wrong.
for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because it was all underground. But because we had to go doo-wop and then blow the lid off of it, and then build an entire amusement park inside of this thing's mouth.
And then look at this spot.
it's
Wow,
causing
that's a
problems.
great spot.
So all of those giant rods that are placed inside of it.
Think I can go right here?
Throat
Oh,
open,
wow.
all double down and brace, because if this thing coughs, it's gonna be really bad. 9:51.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Technicians A repair the relay stuff as control staff reset the park's electrical grid. The grid is offline for 45 seconds. The automatic PA system does not notify guests, as the system is scheduled to automatically shut down at the normal 8 p.m. closing time. The temporary lapse of lighting causes many guests to become panicked and return to the main gantry lift at the lower visitor center. So the park's supposed to be shut down, and because it's supposed to be shut down, no one is told by the PA system that all the lights are going to go off. So once it's blackout, people panic and start running for the elevator. 9:52 p.m. A choking action from the organism begins 31 seconds into the electrical reset. The main dorsal truck violently flexes. Lack of power to hydraulic arming rams causes irreparable damage to several sections of internal infrastructure. So when this thing had a little cough, it crushed everything in certain parts. We'll get to what happened to the parts with the people in it in a second. 9:53. As the electrical system finishes the reboot cycle, the dynamic hydraulic actuators supporting the lower visitor center overcorrect for stability, not accounting for the shift in the wall lining of the nexial cavity in which the visitor center facility is anchored. 2 of the 6 structural supports are torn from their foundation, which causes the facility to list 20 degrees off vertical. The base joint of the vertical entry gantry is bent beyond its design limit angle. So the giant 8-story shopping mall gets broken a bit and does this, and now everyone's fallen over, and now you can't get out. 9:54. The master alarm is tripped automatically. Surface facilities are notified as response teams.
Oh my god, everybody's shooting at me, bro.
9:56. Park rangers are dispatched to rescue groups of visitors trapped in partially collapsed tunnels and trails. 10:03. Continued movement of the organism combined with rainwater causes one of the upper entry gantry supports to slip. An outbound elevator conducts an emergency stop, stranding over 24 visitors. 10:05, tremors registered as far away as the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So this thing starting to cough and move is causing massive earthquakes across the state of Texas. 10:06, soil liquefaction destabilizes surface facilities in and around the organism. Dilation anchors begin retracting to keep the entry orifice open, so now this thing is trying to shut its mouth. 10:12, the master failsafe is activated by the automated park management system. 20,000 liters of acetylene compound are injected into the superorganism via a distributed network of relay stations located through its known internal anatomy. So essentially now they're trying to drug this thing. 10:12, tremors and convulsions intensify as the entry gantry connection to the lower visitor center detaches completely. The lower visitor center begins to collapse downward into the nexial cavity. So that entire thing full of hundreds of people just starts falling deeper into the creature's stomach. 10:12, peristaltic muscle action of the nexial cavity begins to exert substantial pressure on the outer structure of the lower visitor center facility. 10:15, the prime laboid junction just west of the Septum Falls geobiological feature flexes into an open position, releasing a torrent of lagogastric chyma into the dorsal trunk. It is likely that this was the reaction to the acetylene injection. So essentially, because they tried to drug this thing, it started to throw up. 10:16, peristaltic spasms force the caustic chyma slurry through the nexial cavity and up through the lower and upper moisture slurry towards the surface orifice. Okay. 10:16. Many guests attempting to flee the stalled elevator near the entry orifice attempt climbing out of the upper moisture crop, but are ultimately unsuccessful due to torrential rains causing the surface to become
these MGs, bro.
Many end up falling back into the maw. Now it's a Sarlacc pit. People are literally trying to like crawl out the side and keep slipping back into the mouth. 10:17. The chyma slurry
dude, bro, there's no way
geyser several hundred meters in height. Large pieces of undigested organic matter crushed several vehicles and damaged windows. So at this point, it's thrown up, meaning anyone who was still inside of this super acidic acid when it got shot out they're out now, but they're also melting. 10:19, following the several minute-long ejecta event, a deep and incredibly loud roar erupts from the entry orifice as ground tremors intensify further. Large extremities begin surfacing through bedrock and soil approximately 30 to 120 kilometers from the entry orifice. So now other parts of this thing are shooting above the ground up to around 100 miles away from the mouth. 10:25, the acid smell of the gastric ejection can be detected as far as Odessa, Texas. 10:26, 2 park service vehicles and a tour vehicle containing park service employees and several guests attempt to ascend through the entry orifice tube. Because remember, way down in there and past different from the stomach, there were still these truckloads full of people. 10:27, peristaltic action crushes one of the tour vehicles and sucks the other 2 vehicles back into the nexial cavity and down into a digestive organ. These vehicles are presumed destroyed. So as they're trying to get out, it essentially swallows them, because now all the inside structures are broken and it's starting to actually move its body. 10:58, the Pentagon is given authorization from the White House to use nuclear force if necessary to prevent.
How is he pushing that far behind us? Nobody fucking sees this guy.
State, which I'm not really sure that'd do anything, but okay. 11:02.
God
The on-site operations director within the lower visitor center control room.
All right, you fucking retards, get out of my way.
Crushed by the gullet, initiates a final failsafe measure in the form of the contingency measure. 11:02, master event log records successful spin up of the contingency measure. So we don't know, and we're not going to know specifically what this contingency measure is, but I have a theory I'll talk about near the end. 1105. Lower visitor center structure integrity is critically compromised, resulting in total collapse, meaning everyone in that lower visitor center, including the operator who gave the contingency order, were killed by the crushing. 1105. Data connection with lower visitor center is severed, because yeah, it got crushed. 1113. Spasms and motor action of the superorganism begin to noticeably subside. Response teams begin to descend into the surface orifice to attempt rescue operations. 1119. Response team encounters visitor group which had attempted escape from stalled elevator. Most are dead, the remainder are mortally wounded and partially digested due to the caustic gastric ejecta. So it's just an elevator full of melting people. 1142. Radio contact and also when I say I mean like a cool because this is awesome. Radio contact established with Ranger vehicle trapped within Oyster Shame. Due to ventricle closure, no feasible rescue strategy can be developed before complete mastication occurs. 1156. Response team confirms that contingency measure and associate facility are still intact and operating. 1158. Texas Governor Rick Perry formally declares a state of emergency for Gumption County. 1222. Response teams route data and power umbilical to new base camp in the contingency measure facility. 1235. 3 interpit life forms are identified as having been ejected onto the surface. 15 visitors are injured and 7 are hunted by interpit life forms during panicked evacuation of surface resort. So some of the people who were just on land and around are now being killed by the giant crab things that got shot onto the surface. 1241. Park staff managed to kill the 3 large life forms. 102. National Guard helicopters begin delivering supplies and personnel to aid in site containment. 158. Field hospital is constructed to care for wounded visitors and staff. 237. Initial damage surveys report catastrophic destruction of internal park infrastructure. Pit geobiology has dramatically changed in hazard level. 3 a.m. Emergency teleconference of Anodyne Executive Leadership, National Parks Director, and Security of the Interior are present. 3:12. Executive decision is made to initiate FEMA response and assemble a task force for containing superorganism. 4. Media helicopters and vehicles begin to report on scope of disaster. 4:39. Base camp technicians begin to spin down contingency measure. Large fractures due to internal stretch have appeared on mineral components. Engineers advise against reinitializing contingency measure until mineral components can be replaced and repaired. 608. Ground personnel begin assembling a pump system to inject industrial sedatives into the superorganism. Transport trucks containing industrial sedative arrive. 9:45. Emergency teleconference of Anodyne shareholders. 11:20. Several injured visitors inexplicitly leave field hospital and begin walking towards open pit orifice. Approximately 38 individuals are able to crawl back into the orifice over the course of 8 hours. None are recovered. 3:51 p.m. Radio transmission from the trapped Ranger vehicle ceases. Many speculate that other small groups of visitors and staff are still trapped, and that's the end of the relevant timeline. So a few things to note here. Essentially, all of these people died, and all of this occurred because the creature coughed and moved its arm a bit, to give you a scope of how huge this thing is. So if it's not clear, I'm pretty sure what's going on is there's several supernatural things happening just below the surface. The number one being the contingency measure. See, if you look on the map of the above ground section, there is a side place that is a ritual site. And apparently it was a ritual for the natives who would perform these sort of ceremonies in honor of this great being, or in order to keep it down, one way or the other. And on this device pictured, in which we can see what the contingency measure device looks like, It operates off some sort of mineral that they said became compromised while they were performing it. And obviously, whatever the contingency measure was, it worked, because only 13 minutes later, the creature went back to sleep. I think that this rock that is placed inside of this device in order to make this thing go back to sleep is an ancient relic of whatever this great spirit is that put this dragon underground. So the contingency measure itself is essentially worshiping it the way that the natives used to, and that, or alternatively worshiping the spirit that fights the dragon and therefore forcing it to go back to sleep. And this dragon itself, or at least that's as it's described in the old legends, has a sort of hold on the people that were in it, which is why 38 people who barely escaped with their lives crawled back into the mouth of this thing. I also want to mention the terrifying fact that transmission didn't cease with the one car that was cut off by a closed up mouth, or essentially tubule of this thing. That probably still survived and either died of starvation or were eaten by the creatures down there or something, because they were on the radio for like 14 hours and then went out, and then it says they never got them out, which who knows how they went. And at the end of this entire thing, the report essentially says that it's Adonine's fault that any of this ever happened, and the company shut down shortly afterwards and went bankrupt because, you know, public opinion wasn't exactly great after this. And as far as that limb that raised above the ground, this is what that looked like. 100 miles away, this giant thing that shot miles and miles into the air is just maybe a shoulder or an arm or even a finger of whatever this creature is. I also want to mention, to further back up my theory about the contingency plan being a sort of religious or ceremonial kind of thing, in the Q&A, someone asked rumors of religious facilities built within the pit, and in the answer, Trevor says, "I don't have many details on it, but the contingency measure facility referenced in the 2007 disaster overview report was designated as an ecclesiastical religious observance facility in a 1998 GSA construction budget report. Make of that what you will." So absolutely, whatever this contingency report is, it's something spiritual. And
already being shot at.
It worked. Also on a chart that shows you signs of the Mystery Flesh National Park, and one of them that you can
already
see
being killed.
1973, it says ecclesiastical personnel proceed to ritual site encampment. So even in 73, when they were putting this together, they realized there was some ritual practice that went into it. And then if you look at the modern signage that is,
am I fucking blind?
10,000-volt electric fence that says, "Attention, extreme danger, stop, this area has been quarantined for your safety." Fact, over 582 people have died attempting to commune with the superorganism. Fact, the US government is unable to rescue individuals trapped by the superorganism. Fact, you will not receive a gift from the superorganism. And fact, you will find no answers beyond this fence. There is nothing beyond this fence worth dying for. So that whole idea that they have to put up signs saying there's no answers past this and you won't find out anything more goes to say that there has to be at least some people around the area who think the pit holds these special or spiritual properties. And now the pit essentially works as a derelict, left behind establishment of what it once was, with large companies existing that are owned by the government, and there's absolutely no current day records of what they're doing, but it's something they call the reclamation. So what some may think is essentially getting back their resources is probably actually another corporate way of trying to get resources out of the pit, which I'm sure won't go wrong ever. But the 2007 event and the fact that all of it got shut down over it is the reason the entire presentation of everything that you read on the website is of a now defunct park, because it has been shut down and has just been used as a sort of scavenging project since. And the Mystery Flesh Pit National Park is now a monument to man's arrogance and exists as a sort of forgotten memory, only mainly remembered by the many dead that are a symptom of man trying to enter themselves into something that they don't fully understand. And as a quick little tangent off of that, would this not make the best survival horror video game ever? Like, I mean ever. Every single second of the setting is fantastic. You have all of the possible vehicles that the player could use mapped out, and in stuff that I didn't really get
Oh
into,
my
describe
God,
how it
bro.
works. You have an evil company that is trying to gather resources from it, even though it's supposed to be defunct. You have a very long list of different enemy types, some of them these giant bugs and some of them these amorphous blogs that can attack you. You have all the different weapons laid out for you. It talks about people use guns, but that the giant laser bolt shooter guns are the best. And like, there's so much you could do with it. You even have save points. You have these blue lit phones known as lighthouses throughout the entire map, and you got a map that's mapped out for you that you could use as save points. And then you have all the suits and you have the different character models, and like, you even have a plot. You have the plot of the event that happened, and now they're sending in agents on top secret missions to reclaim stuff, and you have this whole underlying thing of like spiritual ritual. And oh my gosh, this would be so cool. It blows my mind that, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first YouTube video ever talking about this thing, because this is one of the coolest Lovecraftian, super absurd cosmic horror pieces I've ever heard of, and it needs more attention. And if this thing, like, if he doesn't make like a book, I think he has a book in the works, but like, if he needs like a narrative, let me at this. I want to write something for this, or like get it to a video game developer. I don't know. This is so cool. I want to see more done with it. Trevor really has something special on his hands. And like, not just from everything that I talked about, but I say this a lot in videos, but I really mean it. Please go to the original website, not only to support him through either his Patreon, or he even has a really cool merch shop that's like Mystery Flesh Pit National Park, like hats and hoodies and t-shirts. But like, I barely touched the surface. There's information about Anodyne, there's information about how details of it work, there's this long science article that talks about how the infrastructure works and how the pipelines work and the architecture that went into the pit. And like, he's done so much, and there's so much fantastic content here. And if this interests you even a little bit, and even if you don't read, I don't care. It's so good. Please check this out. It's worth your time. If you can't tell at this point, I'm a big fan. And I didn't even read all the letters. I didn't read all the propaganda that they did as a means of explaining what the park is, or through the Cooper cave guy who like talks about how creepy the pit is, but why kids don't need to be afraid. I didn't read all the letters. I didn't even read the newspaper article that explains who Jim Jackson is. What I did is hit the highlights so you could have a basic narrative understanding that I did not have going into this, which I personally found as being fun not knowing going into this, because then I had to put it together myself. But now you can check it out for yourself, get a better understanding of the artwork, the lore, and all the supplemental materials that go into this, because this thing is still going on and Trevor is still adding new bits to the lore and making new artwork. And this is an incredibly talented and Aiden, I forget his exact @ on Twitter. I'll like tweet his @ whenever it comes out, but he DM'd me this saying I need to check it out. Next one.